many other...
This is right, Arab.
Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast. I'm Olly Barratt, and in this bulletin we'll be bringing you live updates of the ongoing G7 summit from right here in sunny Cornwall. World leaders are currently discussing major foreign policy issues, from this year's coup in Myanmar to the crackdown on pro-democracy supporters in Belarus, both those topics expected to figure. Stay tuned with me in this broadcast live from Cornwall. Let's take a quick look at the headlines first. G7 leaders are agreeing a declaration aimed at preventing another pandemic at their first in-person summit in almost 2 years. On the sidelines, on day 2 of the G7 summit, French President Emmanuel Macron offers to reset relations with Britain as long as Prime Minister Boris Johnson stands by the Brexit divorce deal he signed with the EU. Macron asks the G7 to lift curbs on key vaccine ingredients. The French president notes how certain nations block the export of ingredients needed for vaccines made by India's Serum Institute. And in sport, world number 1 Novak Djokovic ends Rafael Nadal's reign at the French Open. The Serb dethrones the record 13-time champion with a masterful display in an epic semi-final clash. A packed Day 2 is well underway here in Cornwall, with back-to-back plenary sessions scheduled till the evening local time. Day 1 was all about the coronavirus pandemic and vaccines against the deadly virus. That topic has also been on the agenda through Saturday, and earlier today UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced the Carbis Bay Declaration. He's called it an historic action plan by the G7 nations to prevent future pandemics. Boris Johnson tweeted earlier, and I'll quote him, "Under this agreement, the world's leading democracies will commit to preventing a global pandemic from ever happening again, ensuring the devastation caused by COVID-19 is never repeated." But what is actually in the Carbis Bay Declaration? The pact comprises a series of health policy commitments that member states will work on collectively. They include speeding up the time taken to develop and license vaccines, reducing time taken to come up with treatments and diagnostics for any future outbreak in under 100 days. And all of this while reinforcing surveillance networks to identify and contain the disease before it's too late. The second big thing on the agenda today, the United States is showcasing a united front against China and Russia. The latest we have on that is that the leaders here have signed up to a plan to help build infrastructure in poorer nations. They're set to offer a values-driven, high-standard and transparent partnership, according to the White House. This will be in opposition to China's Belt and Road Initiative. It comes as a perceived win for the Biden administration, and as per a senior White House official, it's not just about confronting or taking on China, but according to the White House, providing an affirmative, positive, alternative vision for the world. Day 2 of the summit is also about the 7 countries and their foreign policy. The day includes sessions with the leaders of Australia, South Africa and South Korea and India. I'm joined now for more on that by my colleague Laura Macon-Isherwood, who's following the foreign policy agenda here in Cornwall very closely indeed. And Laura, there's lots to talk about.
There absolutely is. And of course, this foreign policy session is led by the leaders themselves, really, not given a timetable specifically on topics that they need to cover. They will set out what they think is important. It's hard to tell exactly what that will be, but of course, you've said that China and Russia will be high up on that agenda. Why? Well, because all leaders, particularly the US, President Joe Biden, and the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, are concerned about human rights violations in China, and then also about Russia's deviation from the so-called international rules-based order system. We've seen Vladimir Putin moving away from international missile treaties. We've heard about extra and more aggressive cyber attacks, I suppose, and those are all big issues that all the Western nations need to contend with.
And the US has got that plan through to try and offer some opposition, really, to the Belt and Road Initiative. Do you get the sense that the other G7 nations want to go along with Joe Biden where possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is also about Joe Biden bringing a sense of unity between these nations. Of course, he's coming after a few years of turbulence with Donald Trump representing America at these meetings. And Joe Biden really wants to garner a sense of collaboration between the NATO alliance specifically, because they will think that the Western world working together has more strength, strength in numbers. And with the Belt and Road Initiative, there have been schemes like this offered up before in the past, but the difference has been that whenever investment has been put in from Western nations, there's been a certain strings attached sense to that, whereas China just pushes money into there without any need for those extra things in response, I suppose, from those nations. So this move now from the G7 to provide an alternative, as they call it, is definitely a time for them to try and assert a sense of soft power over those nations and try and keep them on board with them.
And finally, just on those guest nations, the four guests that have been invited that aren't G7 members, it's no coincidence which countries are here.
Absolutely not. And this is obviously the leading economies and democracies that are making up the bulk of the G7, those core members. But the likes of South Africa being invited, India, Australia, South Korea, these are all nations with real economies that are building. They are obviously important trade partners too. So having those countries and representatives from them around the table is a boost for everyone within the G7.
Laura Makin-Isherwood, my colleague, with that foreign policy analysis. Now, European leaders are urging UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson to stick to his commitments on Brexit. The EU is presenting a united front in a row with London over new trading rules. Johnson, who is of course hosting the G7 meeting here, would have wanted the summit to focus on global issues, but Brexit continues to be a sticking point even at this global summit. Johnson is continuing to stand his ground on trade with Northern Ireland, calling on the EU to be more flexible in its approach to easing trade. Ever since Britain completely exited the European Union, relations with the bloc have soured, primarily over the UK's refusal to honour some of the terms of its own Brexit deal. Here in Cornwall, French President Emmanuel Macron offered to reset relations with Britain as long as Boris Johnson stands by the Brexit deal. Sources say that during the G7 meeting, Emmanuel Macron told Boris Johnson that ties between the two countries could improve only if Johnson kept his word on Brexit. Now, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is here too, saying that London must keep its word on the Brexit deal. She's tweeted saying that both sides must implement what was agreed on in the Northern Ireland Protocol and saying that there is complete EU unity on the matter. After Brexit, Johnson delayed the implementation of some provisions of the Northern Ireland Protocol. London says the protocol is unsustainable if it is being implemented in the way that the EU is currently doing, because it says of the disruption that's caused to supplies of everyday goods to Northern Ireland. Brexit wasn't actually part of the formal agenda for the Group of Seven summit here, but it is being raised much to London's dismay. The row over the so-called Northern Ireland Protocol, which Johnson had hoped to leave behind, is casting a cloud over the G7 summit at times. But Boris Johnson has been speaking in the last few minutes to media here about Brexit.
I think, to be fair, there's quite a lot of misunderstanding around the EU about the situation in Northern Ireland, the balance of the Good Friday Agreement, the peace process, and I was just in a gentle way, getting across what that means in and I think that we'll have some pragmatic solutions. And if we don't, then I think that what our friends have also understood is that it's the prime duty of the UK government to uphold the territorial integrity of the United Kingdom. And that's what we're going to do. And we'll do whatever it takes to ensure that.
Now, while world leaders are engaged in diplomatic discussions, activists are also making their presence felt here in Cornwall. Protesters have been taking to the streets to remind leaders of their promises and press them to tackle the climate emergency. Greenpeace activists have made a video to amplify the demand for a green recovery after the coronavirus pandemic.
Climate change activists led protests expressing their anger in multiple ways. While some were dressed in colourful outfits alluding to the climate crisis, a few were dressed as blackbirds as a symbol of warning. Others were seen banging drums, chanting and marching just outside the heavily guarded G7 summit venue along the beach. Greenpeace showcased a video showing a swarm of 300 illuminated drones creating 3D images of endangered species in Cornish skies.
And people living there. I want our leaders to do
Narrated by children, the music for the film has been composed by Emmy-nominated Hannah Peel.
It comes from action, not words.
In the drone video message, Pressing for Action, the child is asking for accountability on the climate emergency.
They protect the coral reefs and all the colourful fish.
So Greenpeace is here with a very simple, clear message, which is act now to the leaders of the G7. They need to step up and actually deliver on their promises for the climate and nature emergency. This morning we launched a video with 300 drones creating a beautiful, fantastic image in the sky of animals and sea creatures that had come and travelled down to Cornwall through the skies to send that clear message to stop extinction in our natural world and to actually deliver on the many warm words and promises that we've heard over many years without the action. So we need to get the government and the world leaders to step up on that now.
I want our leaders to do their jobs and fight for the planet.
The campaign raises demands for more investment in green infrastructure, green jobs, and stopping new fossil fuel projects. Among other policies, Greenpeace wants the G7 to immediately ban all new fossil fuel opportunities with their transition to green industries. Apart from pushing for action on climate change, many protesters called for the leaders of wealthy nations to share the vaccine technology with the world. They demanded the leaders must support a waiver on the intellectual property behind the vaccines, along with delivering a global green recovery deal. Authorities have stepped up action against those disrupting the G7 summit. 7 of them have been arrested, and the police issued warnings saying criminal activity and public disorder will not be tolerated. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Britain's Queen Elizabeth is all set to host US President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden at Windsor Castle on June the 13th. The visit comes as Biden attends the G7 summit here in Cornwall. Let's have a throwback look now at the last 100 years of US presidential visits, from Woodrow Wilson in 1918 to Donald Trump.
In United Kingdom are united indeed. They have been each other's all-weather allies since diplomacy prevailed. No wonder UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson calls the relationship indestructible. So let's bring you the UK visits of the last 12 US presidents. In 1918, US President Woodrow Wilson visited Europe after the end of World War I and spent several days with King George V at Buckingham Palace. He became the first American president to stay there. Then 27 years later, President Harry Truman met King George VI for an informal meeting on the coast of Plymouth. This was a historic meet, because Truman came right after attending the Potsdam Conference in Germany, which was held to negotiate the terms for the end of World War II. In 1959, President Dwight D. Eisenhower made an informal visit to Prime Minister Harold Macmillan and Queen Elizabeth. This was 20 years since the attack by Germany on Poland, which triggered World War II. John F. Kennedy visited Britain twice as the President of the United States. Once in 1961, which was a private visit to the Queen and then Prime Minister. Then again in 1963, Kennedy made a second visit to Britain, which was at the height of the Cold War.
If we could ever bring some degree of control over nuclear matters to the world, I think we would decide that not only had all our other meetings been most useful, but all the efforts that have been made in both of our countries for so many years for peace and for order and for a sense of security, all this effort would be more than justified.
Protesters chanting "Ban the bomb" slogans engulfed the meet. Demonstrators gathered to protest against the use of nuclear weapons. President Richard Nixon also visited Britain twice. He dined with the Queen and visited Prime Minister Harold Wilson in 1969. In 1977, Jimmy Carter attended an economic summit and addressed a NATO ministers' meeting. Britain was Carter's first overseas visit during his presidency. Ronald Reagan made a state visit to the UK in 1982. Famously, the Queen and Reagan went riding. Reagan addressed members of both houses of Parliament and met Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. He also made a visit in 1988, which was hailed as a landmark visit, as Reagan and Thatcher were the defining image of British and US relations by the end of the Cold War. George H.W. Bush met Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher at 10 Downing Street in 1989, calling the relationship between the two countries very, very special.
This visit alone, as we crossed many, many borders and discussed the problems faces, reassures me and just reaffirms what I've always felt, that we have a very, very special relationship. But it needn't be at the expense of our friendship with other countries.
In 1994, US President Bill Clinton met British Prime Minister John Major while attending a state dinner with Queen Elizabeth. Clinton also went to Oxford University, where as a student he protested against the Vietnam War. In 2001, George W. Bush met Tony Blair for talks at his country residence. Then in 2003, Bush made another state visit to Britain. Bush and Blair held their third Iraq War summit. It is said that their close friendship and cooperation over the Iraq War reinforced the special relationship between the US and the UK. In 2005, Bush attended the G8 Economic Summit in Scotland when a suicide bomber attacked London's transport system and killed 52 people. President Barack Obama is the only US president to visit Britain 5 times while in office. In 2009, Barack Obama and his wife Michelle met Queen Elizabeth. In 2011, President Obama was officially invited by the UK government. The visit was hailed as iconic. Obama was popular in Britain and Cameron was keen to portray their closeness, in contrast to the more awkward manner of his predecessor Gordon Brown. President Obama subsequently visited Britain in 2013, 2014 and 2016. Just 2 years later, President Donald Trump's visit became a very controversial one. About 250,000 protesters marched against Trump in London. The US president faced dissent from the British people on his first official visit. But now in 2021, all eyes are on US President Joe Biden's meeting on June 13th. Biden will become the 13th president to sit with the now 95-year-old monarch. Imagine trying to make an impression on someone who's met 62 US presidents before you. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Away from all the politics of the G7 now, and outside of the summit, things are a bit more flamboyant. There have been giant blimps, protests and some lighter moments between the leaders as well. That's all we have time for on this special WION Live broadcast from here in Cornwall. I'm Olly Barratt. Stay tuned to WION for more updates on the G7 summit through the weekend. World is One News.
This is right, Arab.